So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zoto Mbele. I'm the CFO of the Development Bank of Southern Africa. So this afternoon, I will be facilitating the session on infrastructure, investment in infrastructure for water. And I believe it's a very simple topic to talk about today because we're all experiencing the challenges with respect to the water shortages, especially in Gauteng, and we've seen that as well in eThekwini. So it really talks to how critical is the investment in the infrastructure for water. So I can't overemphasize it. I think it's self-explanatory. But also, we also know that this sector is critical not only for our own consumption as water users, for life, but it's equally important as well for the network industries in terms of stimulating the economy. It's a very critical input in any economic activity, let alone our own life. With me today, I am joined by the esteemed panel of the experts, and I would like to call upon them to come on stage. I'll start with Dr. Lester Goldman, the CEO of the Water Institute of Southern Africa, if you can join me on the stage. Followed by Dr. Valerie Naidu, who is the Executive Manager at Water Research Commission, followed by Mr. Alex Simalabwe, the Chief Executive Secretary, Global Water Partnership, Southern and African Coordination. And the last two speakers will be Mr. King, who will join us, Commercial Lead, Southern and East Africa, HDF, Energy South Africa, and also joined by the last speaker on the panel would be the CEO of the TCTA, Mr. Percy Sichemane, on the stage. I hope you'll continue to be engaged and energized, given that it's a graveyard shift, but we hope you'll still be energized to discuss this. Sorry, I'm not seeing my panel list properly. Let me just move to this side. So, colleagues, as I said earlier on in my preamble, I can't overemphasize the importance of water and obviously the investment in that water sector. We have also known that in the national investment framework for the water sector, there's been a lot of amounts that have been bandied about, some of it to a tune of about 1.3 trillion that needs to be invested in the sector for the next couple of years. And that number excludes just the life cycle cost, just the capital replacement of the cost of that part of the infrastructure. So today we'll hear from the experts, on the challenges. Maybe I would have liked to have Minister of Water and Sanitation. Unfortunately, the minister couldn't make it for this afternoon, but it should have been important to hear directly from him what is his perspective. And in this case, I would like Percy, the CEO of TCTA, to share the perspective on the challenges that we are experiencing with the sector, especially what we are seeing in Johannesburg. So the stories, they vary. There is investment definitely in the bulk part of the infrastructure, which is in the upstream side. But what we are witnessing from the water services infrastructure, which is more at the municipal level, obviously reaching to our taps, it's a challenge because some people have gone on by a couple of number of days or weeks on end without water, and the same was experienced in eThekwini. So if you can possibly, give us the context of what we are experiencing right now within the sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoto. I think what's important is this is a multifaceted problem in terms of what you're highlighting. I can start maybe from a level where I say one of the biggest problems is the value chain itself, in that it's not necessarily under one ministry. And if you look at the bulk side, it makes sense. Even if the minister was here, he would be talking about water and sanitation from the point of view that that's where he has direct control. But the delivery level is sitting in a different ministry where it's under COCTA. And I'm not saying this in a bad way, but when you look at integrated planning, it makes sense for you to be able to look at the total value chain. But having said that, the problem is as well now, at that particular level, basic services sometimes are looked at as streams of revenue that is then used to subsidize or cross-subsidize other functions within the municipality, where you don't have a function where you would say whatever happens in there, even in terms of revenue generation, would actually be limited to that particular space. So sometimes what happens is you look at the other side, you look at water boards. Water boards' job and function is to actually make sure that they actually even look after their infrastructure. Now the problem here is the money that flows into the municipality then gets utilized for other functions because there's so many other things that get done. And sometimes it's at the expense of looking after that infrastructure. But that's just one part. You specifically cited Johannesburg as an example. If you do proper planning in terms of infrastructure, you're supposed to actually know that in the next year, this is the capacity that I need. 5 years, this is the capacity that you need. But if you look at the influx of people coming into a city like Johannesburg, it's very difficult to now say, this is what I've planned to do, and this is the number of people that I'm planning for, because everybody is always migrating to that particular place. So sometimes you might find that the infrastructure as you've planned it and your budget is not necessarily enough to actually cater for the multitude of people that are moving into that area. Now, that is over and above the fact that, like I've said, you are not actually looking at, because we also don't have a very robust, I know the minister is looking at setting up a very robust structure that's supposed to oversee the particular sector from a point of view of saying what kind of regulation needs to happen. We actually think if we do that, we're just looking at it from a tariffing point of view. But in fact, it has to be more than that. You need to set the minimum standards in terms of the performance of the infrastructure, the level of education even and training in terms of the people that are running these particular things. You would find that at the level where there are problems, some of the qualifications or quality of people that are running these things are not at where they need to be, and there's nobody that's actually giving or looking at that part. But I'm happy that the engagement with the minister are now moving towards saying we do need a regulator, but not on the funding side only or the tariffing side, but also looking on the technical side in terms of saying what are the minimum standards, and if people don't meet those minimum standards or the municipalities, then that service needs to be given to those that actually meet the minimum standards. In that way, then you can actually ensure that the infrastructure will be looked at, and then you won't have this situation that we are feeling at this particular point in time, let alone the issue of climate change. We've had some very rough engagements when it comes to climate change with drought and whatever. So those kind of things are supposed to be an anomaly, but we see in that this the climate change has made everything to be not as predictable as it used to be. So those are some of the multitude of problems that are happening. But our minister, the Minister of Water and Sanitation, has decided that he's not going to say, no, it's somebody else's problem, it's at the distribution level. He's actually started going into those particular sites, because the Department of Water and Sanitation is still responsible for signing off all the plans that come from municipalities for infrastructure development. And most of the time then, that's something that was not looked at as it's supposed to be. So legally it's there, but it's only now being effected at this stage to actually ensure that there's alignment with the state of the infrastructure versus the approvals that come via the fiscus in terms of what needs to happen. So those are some of the things that the minister is doing at this stage.
Okay, no, thank you so much for that. At least there's some thought processes that are going in and some interventions on the regulation part of it. Maybe it's about time now we bring in Alex, who's going to Mr. Sima Labwi, who's going to share some perspective in terms of the international benchmark or expertise that comes with the water delivery, especially with the infrastructure. What have you seen out there from the regulations, from the financing or funding model of this water infrastructure? If you can share some perspective, which is supposed to formulate some solution also that we can adopt in South Africa. Thanks. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. Can you hear me? I think I'm loud and clear.
Yeah, we can hear
Yeah, so my name is Alex Simalawi, Chief Executive Officer for the Global Water Partnership Africa, as well as Director for a flagship program of the African Union called the Continental Africa Water Investment Program, which was launched just 2 years ago by heads of states. So I think in responding to your question, let me start by first of all painting a picture of what's really happening to the water sector based on the work that we have been doing with many partners. Many of the challenges that South Africa is going through in terms of the water sector are not unique. A number of countries have gone through the same path that South Africa is going through right now in terms of what happens after post-colonial independence. Because previously, most of the water systems were very centralized, providing services to a small number of population, the colonialists. And then over time, countries gained independence, starting with Ghana in the 1950s and many other countries, and South Africa later on from post-apartheid. So a lot of these countries inherited a water system and water services for sewerage and sanitation that was very centralized, serving a smaller population. Following post-independence, post-apartheid in your case, mass movement of people from different parts of the country into the cities. So it created an immediate problem. The infrastructure that was built for water services, even for transport, for ICT, was not adequate. So in a number of countries, what happened then was, particularly in the ICT sector and transport sector, was the deregularization of the sectors, with government beginning to play a more regulatory role, while allowing the private sector or semi-private sector institutions to come in and play a particular role. We saw that in the ICT sector. I think many of you remember in the 80s where you had to dial this phone, you had to dial so many times before you could reach, you could make a call. The sector got completely deregularized in a way that private operators came in. We saw that in the transport sector with PPP's model come in. With the water sector, government continued to play a much bigger role. This is across the continent in Africa, a much bigger role. But what happened is that it reached a point where the infrastructure was completely getting dilapidated. The local authorities, the municipalities, continued to play a critical role in providing of services, but they did not have the capacity. Because providing water services is a technical profession. It's engineering at the end of it. It requires managerial capacity, technical capacity. So a lot of these countries went through a phase where the infrastructure was breaking down. This is what you're seeing in South Africa, until they reached a point where it was going to become an issue of social unrest. So what countries did was to begin to separate the functions of regulatory functions to provision of water services, with the municipalities begin to play more of an oversight role through what was called in many countries like Zambia, Uganda, Kenya, commercialization of the water services provision by setting up private water companies in which the municipalities are shareholders. And then only then did you begin to see financing begin to go in for repair of the services, provision of water services, expansion of coverage, but also improving the efficiencies. Many countries went through that. South Africa has not. So you are having this problem now where there is no capacity of implementation by the municipalities. There's a mix of what is called the game poacher principle. The municipalities are responsible for water services provision, but also regulation. So the accountability mechanisms are not yet very much well established. Even though you have the national government's role is very limited, unfortunately, when it comes to municipal services delivery. So some of the key challenges you are having as a country are very similar to what others have gone through. So what you need to do and what needs to be done, and if the minister was here, I know because we've been talking about this for some time, is ongoing amendment to the Water Services Act are important to make sure that you professionalize the provision of services, separate regulation from the provision of, bring in professional service providers that can run these entities as professional organizations, attract engineers, professionals, because the issue of capacity does not mean that South African governments, citizens don't have the capacity. They have the capacity, but they are not working for the municipalities for a variety of reasons, poor performance, poor service delivery. So overall, Some of these challenges are compounded by the mix of the institutional and governance which are mixed. It's not unique to South Africa. 53% of African countries, according to UN, report a problem of governance, mixing of these roles. 71% report a problem of capacity. I'm talking globally in terms of African statistics. So it is not unique what you have, but the country will need to take certain steps. There's already, as I conclude now, there's already a call for citizens to input into amendments to the Public Service Act, from what I hear from the DG. He's next door. I was talking to him before I came here. It's out there for public comment. Contribute and support the direction the department is taking, because we believe, we've been working with them, with the World Bank and other partners to give them advice. We believe they're going the right way, but it will need certain amendments to the Water Act to clearly separate the role of the regulatory functions as well as the provision of services. Thank you.
All right, thanks for that experience. I hope in the second round we'll also cover the fact that, sometimes people believe that water comes from rain, so why would you have to charge us? Yet what we charge is water services, infrastructure, not necessarily for the water. So it would be good to understand that once you professionalize and separate the roles and bring in the private sector on the partnership. Maybe let's move forward with you've also mentioned the capacity constraint in terms of the technical skill set. Let me hear from Lester. Maybe if you can share your experience, because just to feed off from that, what the capacity building and any advocacy role that WISA, the Water Institute of South Africa, plays in respect to strengthening the capacity within the sector itself so that it's well functioning.
Thank you. So as a professional body, our main role is looking at the strengthening and capacity development of individuals who work in the water sector. We do that in conjunction with some other professional bodies and statutory bodies like SIDSSA and the SACNASP. And we specifically are now looking at the designation professional process controller. So before I get into a little bit of context in terms of the current challenges, I think Percy has touched on the asset management issue and the condition of existing assets failing. It is notable that the focus does seem to be on building new infrastructure rather than managing what we have effectively, firstly. In terms of employment, some of our members have told us that there is relatively weak leadership at some levels of government. There are few engineering professionals with sufficient business experience leading them, and I think that becomes an opportunity, for the minister and for the sector itself. We are looking obviously at the development of management courses which will assist at all levels, along with the development of material which will assist in terms of the drop criteria, improving the performance of the municipalities in that regard. Obviously, the impact of poor wastewater management is something that needs to be looked at. The impact of that is our rivers and our oceans are obviously not as healthy as they should be. And, this has got a largely negative impact on tourism and recreation activities, which are both large job creators. So it does have a very negative impact on our economy. I can't emphasize the fact that the negative impact of poor and or missing water and sanitation services. This affects public health very negatively. It impacts absenteeism, both at school level and obviously of workers. And a recent study, showed by Guy Pegram, showed that the impact of that is in the billions on our economy. Obviously, impact of intermittent water supply obviously impacts downstream metering and so forth. So what we are doing is we largely hold events, be it conferences, symposia, and or training events, where we try and understand exactly what these challenges are, the root causes of them, and we try and, along with organizations like the WRC, try and develop training material to go out there and make an impact. Certainly what we need to focus on over the next 2 years would be looking at the drop criteria or the drop results, taking that along with research, turning it into training material to have a positive impact. From a process controller perspective, along with our process controller division, it's looking at the needs of those process controllers at the various levels and developing material to try and improve their effectiveness and efficiency, which hopefully will result in improved performance, but also improved accountability. So in a nutshell, that's what we're trying to do over the next 2 years. And certainly, I think the Minister in gazetting Regulation 3630 last year has certainly done one major beneficial impact for the sector.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's continue to also one of the knowledge institutions within the water sector. Having listened to the challenges that the sector is experiencing as a Water Research Council, if commission, I keep saying it's a council, the commission. So what have you come up with in terms of the solutions from the services itself? Could it be innovative solutions towards the policy position, that will culminate into a policy position from different perspectives that will benefit the water sector in order to alleviate the disadvantages that we are seeing right now? Over to you, Ms. Valendra.
Thank you. I think from the Water Research Commission, I think the first thing is we've taken a strategic shift in the organization itself. And in that regard, we've decided that there's a lot of research. I mean, there's a lot of knowledge products out there. So why aren't people using it? What are some of the challenges around that? So we've taken a stakeholder-centric approach, a very local scale approach to research going forward. We've taken an innovation-driven water sector approach. And we've said, instead of just focusing on water security, which is still extremely key, we'll take water security and also push it through the lens of how do you build climate resilience and climate adaptation in the sector. So what we've been doing is working on areas and trying to understand, so the concept of universal access is not going to be provided by just built environment and centralized services. And that's because we don't have unlimited water resources, if you understand where the water resources sit. We don't have unlimited energy anymore as well. We have resource constraints. We have economic constraints. And then you have to deal with the issue of economies of scale, because centralized systems, they depend on economies of scale, density, et cetera. So from a research organization, then we put this challenge forward and asked, how do you think about this problem different in order to provide universal access? And the one way you can start thinking about it is ask, how does this happen in other sectors? So you can get economies of scale by mass production in terms of optimizing supply chains and optimizing manufacturing, for example. How would that work in the water sector? You can get economies of scale by aggregation of services, so like the Uber model, et cetera. So how would that work in the water sector? And then you start to see that, and it goes back to the colleagues that we're talking about, South Africa has a very strong centralized approach. It comes from a history and a legacy, and it'll be suitable for certain parts of the country. But we'll never get universal access with just that approach. So now you have to look at how do you take services out there, and how do you move from a centralized built environment approach to an aggregated services approach that take distributed infrastructure at household, at communal, at municipal level, and start saying, how do we build sustainability in that? And I think the colleagues have correctly said, you have to build it through a standards approach, a regulations approach, a training approach that is able to build grassroots up from communities that are able to say that we can't do everything through pipes and pumps, and some of it will have to be done in using a different model going forward. So the way we've worked with the Department of Water and Sanitation is we put forward the concepts of the independent water and sanitation providers as filling those gaps in those spaces, both from the point of view that the municipalities just don't have enough resources to provide these services and what would be the next best model, but also from the perspective of how do you bring SMMEs and inclusive growth into the space as we're providing services. We've also worked with the department around how would we regulate and license water service providers, because you can't just open it up and then not understand how these services are to be provided. And then going forward, for example, because we've got these massive programs where we're looking at full recycle, sort of on-site, reinvent the toilet systems, we're then saying, how do you increase the uptake of smart innovations for sanitation systems, but who are the first segments to go? Who are the leaders? Who will be the pioneers? And here we're working with the department to see how do you create a regulatory framework. So how do I make, say, the developers the first adopters by enabling from a national to a municipal policy and bylaw space? How do we manage that effectively? Because developers want to grow. They want to develop and move on to the next thing. They can't wait for grids to come online and services to be brought online. So how do we then say, well, here's an opportunity. There are technologies out there, full recycle. It'll give you the convenience of a flush toilet, but you have to build the kind of service model that allows your economic growth zone to continue. And then how do we work with Department of Housing, social housing, low-income housing, to also say there are opportunities here. You don't have to wait for new water allocations. You don't need to overload the current wastewater treatment works. You can actually look at an alternate way of getting some of these services quicker. I'm going to stop there.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Naidu. Maybe it's about time now to bring in Mr. Dexter King, just to talk to us about the green hydrogen, especially within the context of the desalination of water, which is very much expensive. So can you share your perspective, how that is going to pan out within that context? Thanks.
Thanks, Odwa. So if you were to look at green hydrogen in South Africa and Southern Africa, there's certain hubs within South Africa, and I'll touch on from Buchu Bay in the Northern Cape to Saldanha Bay and to Kucha. And those are seen as three big hubs for green hydrogen in South Africa. And obviously, you asked the question, where we're going to get this water from? South Africa is a water-scarce country. And for this green hydrogen and green ammonia, they require millions of liters of water that we potentially don't have. And so the conversation stems into desalination plants. And so it's part of now the solution for our green hydrogen offtake. So to give you an example, for 1 kilogram of hydrogen, you require 9 liters of water. And if we want to pump out serious tons of hydrogen per annum, we're going to need close to a few desalination plants set up. And it all goes towards sustainability of water. So, I work for an IPP. We develop green hydrogen power plants, and our projects are in Mpumalanga, also one of the sub-states. And we got a unique solution where we've got a closed loop of water to drive that sustainability. So Mpumalanga doesn't have that much water, but we only require 1,200 cubic meters of water per day for our solution. And we can do that with a closed loop with fuel cells, electrolyzers, and so forth. To give you an example, our project in Swakopmund, which is in a desert, only requires 70 cubic meters of water per day. But we've actually received a 20 million euro grant from the European Investment Bank to build a desalination plant. So it goes to the question, where are the incentives, so for developers, and also where are the sticks for off-takers? So, by 2030, if they don't decarbonize with clean hydrogen, green ammonia, e-kerosene, where are the penalties that they have to pay? And that drives the whole chicken and egg solution of, where's the project, but there's no off-taker. It solves that solution. So water obviously is very important within South Africa for green hydrogen and for us to be seen as the hydrogen pioneers for Africa. And our neighbors in Namibia are looking quite strong in green hydrogen for export to Europe. But I think with the current infrastructure and the expertise that we have within the ecosystem of South Africa, I think, especially on the water aspect, we can be very successful for being a green hydrogen economy.
Okay. Yeah, because also, back in the days, even the desalination plant, there's always been a talk, but for some reason, water sector could never get around it in order to augment our water system, because as you've said, rightfully so, we are a water scarce country. So, if you think about just that part being expensive, I don't know, the next part of it now to power the electrolyzers with green hydrogen, with green energy is also another cost on its own. So the practicalities of it reaching some scale, hopefully, where it can be affordable, I think we look forward to that. Maybe let me bring you back, Mr. Percy, on the agency, because I think it's one of also the solutions within the sector, right? There's been a lot of talks with this infrastructure agency for water. I don't know what is the latest name of it. It had been changing names. But if you can just give us some perspective to what is it that it's supposed to solve for? What is this challenge that you are not seeing that the agency will bring about a solution to the current challenges?
Okay, thanks, Otto. The whole thing of the infrastructure agency, I must first start by saying this is also contained in the National Development Plan in terms of something that South Africa needs to do. And it's more a consolidation of particular functions, because if you look now, you have TCTA doing certain functions on behalf of the department as a special purpose vehicle. But then you have the water trading entity. I don't know why it's called an entity, because it's not necessarily an entity, doing the other parts. Now, it makes sense to combine them and then have one entity that looks at this. Firstly, the most important part of it will make for a better planning. Because if I look at my daily job as working for TCTA, I'm dependent on the department for projects, but I never know what projects are coming until I get the minister then giving a directive on that. But this will make for better planning, if you know, because then it brings us closer to the planning part of it. There would be part that gets done by the department, but then the whole TCTA water trading entity will be closer to that process. And if you are running an organization, it's best if you can do long-term planning, because you know what's going to be coming. And what we're looking at is also, there's a lot, because the department is a referee and a player. Now, usually you would say national government, especially at departmental level, they need to be focused on policy, but we know within the water space that's not the case. So it makes sense to take some of these functions and house them where they belong. But with that as well would come the assets. Like I said, TCTA as an example at this stage does not have an asset base. They are a special purpose vehicle. Now, having them within the agency would also mean that those assets can actually come, and it's something that can be leveraged upon if you think about it. We know that there's a shrinking tax base if you look at the economy of the country at this stage. Now, if you have assets that are sitting there but they are not leveraged, this would be the right opportunity if you set up the agency to say there's a consolidation that's necessary, but also now with those assets, you don't have to now put a lot of strain on the fiscus as well, except for, of course, if National Treasury decides that they would want to provide guarantees for the funders in terms of the projects that would be looked at. But I think for me, from where I sit, the most important part would now be the fact that you can actually plan much better, because at this stage, too many decision makers, and each with their own priorities. So sometimes we lose the opportunity of really having a consolidated planning.
Okay, all right, no, thanks for that. Maybe, Mr. Alex, if you can, you kind of indicated earlier on that there's public-private partnership projects that have been successful outside SA. In South Africa, I think something close to that would have been the likes of the TCTA when they build the infrastructure on behalf of the offtake being on the large bulk part on the raw water users, the industrial users for Sasol and Eskom. I think that it's been a success in terms of having that private-public partnership. But just at the retail level, where consumers are more like the domestics, how does it work in terms of the consultation, people believing that this water they need to pay for? Because in their mind, they think really water comes from God, why do we need to pay for it? Currently, at least it's must, it's must by the fact that we pay rates and taxes in our bill. Obviously, you can see the portion for the water, but I'm trying to imagine when it's a pure standalone just for water, the challenges, if you can help us understand that. And if you don't pay rates and taxes, in some cases, they don't allow you to buy for electricity. So they have some stick that they use so that you continue to pay for the rates and taxes. So just help us understand that the models where really the private sector partnerships and the public sector have worked in respect to the retail side of the business.
Yeah, thank you, Zodwa, and also colleagues that have, TCTA has also elaborated to, spoken to this issue about the agents that is being talked about. The president this morning talked about a project that was awarded recognition by the United Nations with over 1,500 consultation meetings. It's a good thing. But I think South Africa, one of your problems is over-consultation. I've heard about the infrastructure agency for over 20 years being mentioned in Pretoria there. And up to now, it's still not yet there. Now, think about what I said at the beginning area in my introductory remarks and how the deterioration of the water infrastructure asset. Because with that, poor operation and maintenance, usually KJS 45 to 60% of water gets lost under the ground, water that has been treated, chlorinated, taxpayers' money used, and you are losing 45 to 60% of that water into the ground. Now, the president also talks about if you want to make money, you have to be in this conversation as a private sector. If you want to provide services, you have to be part of the government. Now tell me, which private sector is going to come and fund or finance a business that is losing 45 to 60% of its revenue? Just forget water. Just tell me any serious businessman who is going to do that. So the challenge we have about a lack of private sector participation, I think in Africa you have 97% telecoms, private sector is involved in telecoms, only 3% for water. Not just South Africa, I'm talking about Africa-wide. Energy is also really taking off in terms of the private sector, but water is still very much traditional, it's centralized, the municipalities are controlling, the provincial governments are controlling. They want to keep the tariffs low because they don't want to get voted out. It's not that they don't know that the tariffs are too low. What they know is that if they make the right decisions, they may not be in the office the next time. They're very sure about that. So it's a sort of a conundrum we have in the water sector because everyone needs water to survive. You cannot overprice water because otherwise people die. And as a custodian or parliamentarian or a local government leader or a councillor, your responsibility is to make sure that everyone has services. Because if they don't, they will go and toy, which South Africa is also very good at. So what needs to happen is a balanced approach. Proper incentives and pricing that takes into consideration those that cannot pay. It has to be provided for at the very minimum. And that is government responsibility to do that. But then you have to price water, and not just the water supply, the amount of water, which is another problem in the sector. We price volume of water. In many other businesses, you don't price like you price the capital investments. How much money do you need to return on your investments, the water pipes, the water treatment plants, everything that goes into, not by volume. When you drive from here to Johannesburg, you will pay different tariffs on the road, the toll. The toll fees is estimated based on how much money went into constructing that segment of the road, not how many kilometers you drive. You see, in the water sector, not only South Africa, but many other countries, we have it the other way around. We price on volume, which means those who are using water for productive purposes, for instance, in the mining, instead of paying for the capex repayment of the value of the asset, they're actually being hugely subsidized because they're using the same formula as paying for somebody sitting in a peri-urban area where they don't have water, where they don't have the services. So there are many ways of going around that, and each country has taken different approaches. But South Africa will have to look very carefully at its historical disadvantaged situation and see, because you also don't want to price water so low that people just feel like it's free from God. Because if you don't pay for it, if it's too low, then people just waste it. So with the private sector, if I come to that, you look at the valuation of water supply from abstraction, water pumping, distribution, conveyance, treatment, and then distribution. You look at the whole part of that. The conveyance from abstraction to pump the water is very expensive. TCT, I can confirm here. It's very expensive, that part. Okay. While there are certain elements that are easier for the private to come in, for instance, water treatment. They may want to focus only on the water treatment aspects of that. And this model has been used in Kigali, in Rwanda, in partnership with the government, the African Development Bank, and the private sector. It's very much, the UK government was involved in this as well, where the private sector focused on the parts where they're able to retain their revenue. Because at the end of the day, cash is king. You need to have the revenue for the private sector to come in. While the government focuses on parts which are so long-term, the water conveyance system, it's very expensive, but also to retain that, the private sector to carry that is a huge risk because it's too expensive. So you need to segment according to different components of the water value chain and also look at which part is profitable for the private sector to retain their money, like a revenue stream, which part can government take as a responsibility and then they own the asset. And then finally, the whole issue of delivery capacity. This is where you need to separate, as I said earlier on, service delivery function, and I think my colleague has been very clear on independent service providers. Because if you are the one doing the oversight role, supplying the water, you lose 45 to 60%, who cares? But if you know that this amount of water is too much and I'm going to be penalized for it, you take some responsibilities. So I think the whole question for me is looking at this integrated system, and then finally I think what is also critical is to, the way you approach water supply, water pricing, take an integrated approach. Because water alone, despite everything I have said, is not very profitable. If you bundle the asset of water plus energy, for instance, as an example, you are able to distribute the risk between the energy sector, what is called the water energy food nexus. You are able to distribute the risk across sectors. But if you just take water on its own, because of this social aspect of it becomes very complicated. So the integrated approach where you are developing your energy system, whether it's your solar powered system as well, plus your water supply system, you bundle the investments. You can even include roads, why not? Because at the end of the day, the same agency is responsible. You can package transport, energy, water as one package of development, but it cannot be the municipality doing it because they have to play an oversight role. Then you give the providers that are able to do this, distributing the risk.
Okay. No, thank you so much. Maybe it's also at the right level to bring in the Water Research Council in terms of what has been their innovative approach, knowing that the pricing strategy may not be perfect. I will just, after that, I'll take the questions from the floor as well.
From the raw water pricing strategy, they are looking now not just volumetric, but the infrastructure as part of it. So, but I think there's some bigger issues here. So it's not just the capex. Generally, South Africa does find the money for the capex. I find money is available. If you look at the more profitable water boards, et cetera, they say, we can do big projects, et cetera. The issue is that when you invest in these large infrastructure, it's a 25-year investment. In fact, if you operate and maintain it really well, it's even longer than that. So you're investing into the future. So in terms of that, I think that we are not necessarily paying enough attention on operations and maintenance and how to fund that, not only from the perspective of the ones that can pay, because we're really not good at revenue collection as well, so we must accept that as well. But we're also not good at understanding what does this cross subsidization really mean, and what's the limitation and where is that limit? We don't seem to be very clear around that. And as a result, we're having policies is generous. We want to do a lot for the people, but we're not quite understanding that. The second thing is, I think you're correct in the sense that government takes responsibility over long-term investment. And how does government take that responsibility and offer the guarantees, if you're going to bring the commercial partners in, that allow them to give you the efficiencies, the discounts, et cetera, that come with that kind of service provision? And I don't think we've thought through those kind of models yet. There's a transition also that needs to happen, I would say, from the department in terms of how you enable this. And it's not a one-way conversation, because implementation from a bulk service providers, I think that implementation can occur with that conversation can occur with TCTA, the large water boards, et cetera. And I think they could come, and they have the skill sets to come to the right kind of conclusions. But I think at the municipal level, that conversation, we're way, let's say, we're not even close to having the right kind of conversations to lay the right mechanisms in. We're still talking about, can we ring fence the water budget that goes to municipalities? So that water budget, O&M, in some municipalities, it's sitting at less than 1%. And how do you run infrastructure at less than 1% if you're not investing in your operations and maintenance? So I see a lot of wastage by not doing the right things, by maybe not ring fencing, not understanding what is the real cross-subsidization mechanism, not understanding how to maybe bring the private sector in, but maybe reduce their risk while they're bringing in capital from the outside in some sort of way from government. And I think the other things that need to be looked at is we always make the assumption, for example, that people don't want to pay. I can give you 2 examples where we're testing a user-paid model in an informal settlement. Okay. So government, from a legislative point of view, we have to provide some sort of sanitation provision. And that basic is very basic. So we ask the question, if I provide you with a higher level of service, will you pay? And what would you be willing to pay? And we're finding that people are willing to pay like 300 Rand a month on something. And so you start to test that maybe we're making the wrong assumptions around how we basically collecting revenue, and where are we putting that cutoff point. The second thing is on the very rural village cooperative spaces of South Africa, very dry, local municipalities not widely resourced, et cetera. We're finding that using multiple use service models, when you work with communities, train them, teach them how to do some basic operations and maintenance, they're taking over that. And they're using almost Stockfell type approaches to pooling resources to pay for their pumps and pipes so that they can actually bring water in and increase their livelihoods, increase the economic prosperity at that level. So I think there's opportunities there. It's not just simply government. It can take a multifaceted approach of bringing in the social compact with people, the business sector or the private sector, and then government also providing the leadership and the direction.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I think we can take questions just to break the monotony of hearing from us. There's mics there. I think I've seen a couple of hands, 1, 2, 3, I think. Yeah, please go ahead. The mic is off.
There we go. Thank you. Hello. My name is Ernst Miller. I am an ESG lawyer at the global law firm Herbert Smith Freehills. South Africa is in a very interesting year this year because it's an election year, which makes it very exciting. Lots of promises, lots of ideas. Water is a very tricky topic, I think, because different from, say, electricity, water is a fundamental human right that's regulated in the Declaration of Human Rights. I want to know from people on stage, not throwing the question at anyone specifically, given where we are in this year and the developments that we see and potential changes in government, should we anticipate that we'll be having the same conversation next year talking about what we should do with water, given that you might have people going out, people coming in, and not actually a lot happening on the ground to address issues relating to water infrastructure?
We'll take maybe the next question.
Thank you. Bertus Bierman from Lebelela Water Users Association. Just in terms of going forward on you're looking at different models. I think one of the models that we've seen where the private sector and government is actually working together very nicely is with the Williefonds Management Model program. It's a 25 billion rand project where the institutional members, which is basically the different sectors of government, as well as the private sector as the commercial users, are funding and also controlling the whole system on a 50-50 basis. In terms of that, 50% of the funding is coming from government and 50% from the industry, be it mines and industrial users on that side. But the important thing is that once you have a organization basically sitting between government and the private sector as specifically a non-profit organization, but with the ability to implement because it's set up to implement and also go beyond implementation. One of the basic things that is part of it is operational readiness for each portion of the project that's being done. So part of it is then the bulk raw water, which is the expensive part you're talking about 50% almost of the whole project. But the other part is providing treatment plants, bulk potable water, as well as reticulation to the communities to a yard connection basis. Now, there's a lot of things you said that is a problem that you, in the process, you are addressing it. We're not yet at the point where we can say we will get full repayment. But from government side, from the institutional members side, the institutional members take the risk in terms of the institutional side of it, and the commercial users are taking the risk in terms of the commercial side. Just if you look at, it's easy to say it's a 50-50 payment, but if you calculate what the industry is actually paying, out of their 50%, 3/4 of that is actually contributing to the social side. So that actually means that's a huge capital investment into the social side, because there's also a benefit for them. And at the end of the day, the industry will partner with you if they know there's also a long-term benefit for them. if we don't do that, their license to operate is actually in jeopardy. Because the communities where they sit, the communities next to them, you know, are targeting them for water, for electricity, for jobs, for everything. And if you don't get anything, you start to damage infrastructure. As a result, and I can understand fully that, you know, if a big mine sits next to me, its lights are shining into my house every night. I don't have lights. I don't have water, and the big pipeline is running right next to my house. Sorry, guys, I'll pick up a stone and throw it somewhere. So I understand why they're upset. But this model that we have currently is a partnership, a collaborative partnership that's a negotiated agreement between government and the private sector, to the extent that if I look at the financial institutions almost falling over themselves to fund this, because they understand that the implementation is very professional, there's a very professional team, and it is, you know, sometimes government can overspend and not actually worry about it because you are judge and implementer. The mining industry, on the other side, look after every cent. You combine that too, at the end of the day, you sitting in the middle of it is doing, you know, you get the pressure from both sides to be absolutely the best option, the lowest cost, the most sustainable option that you can have. So I think going forward in all these discussions, it's important that we also bring in these collaborative partnerships as an investment and as a management tool over periods. Because in this program, at least for 25 years is then secured as also a operation and maintenance of bulk and a resource agreement to support the municipalities to the extent that they need it to also then help them with their operation and maintenance to the extent that the agreement with them is being satisfied through the negotiation with each and every one of them. So I think I'll leave it there, but there's a lot more to say about this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bertus. Actually, the more I was talking with my colleagues, that there's two critical stakeholders that were missing in the panel. We should have heard the other stakeholder from the private public partnership, which is this Libalelo Association, this Infra, and the COCTA on the municipal side, just to understand the issues at the water service level for that. But anyway, thank you. You would have shared your model brilliantly if you were part of the panel, and people would have localized it better. And then we have another. So I have no, okay, maybe I've noted two more questions. Maybe let's take an answer for the first. And I know people it's election time. Do you want to pass it over to Alex, because he's got nothing to lose? Or who's got guts to answer it?
The first political question?
Yes, the political question.
I don't know what will happen after May, so it's difficult to be very precise on whether the conversations will continue. But I know, by experience, from what I see in different countries, the conversations do continue from government to government. Why? Because the problem of water supply are very localized. There are very few examples where central government has come and says, hey, miracles happen. Because you need capacity to implement. So even if there's changes up there, as long as the capacity is not there in the municipalities, they cannot deliver the services. Because South Africa's problem is not even a problem of money for the municipalities. Billions of rands get returned to the treasury. I think the year 2023, before last year, over R1 billion got returned to the treasury. Okay. Not spent. Meanwhile, people don't have water. Money for water gets returned, but people don't have water. So the problems are much bigger than, for instance, just money. So I think that's what I can say to that. But I like what this gentleman has told us from Mandela, the examples, because Professor Michael Porter of Harvard Business School popularized, I think, the concept of shared value partnership. And I think this is what you are describing. It's a very successful model, not only for water, but even healthcare, education, where you have this form of partnerships. Yeah. Because then it goes beyond something I really don't like, what's called the famous CSR, corporate social responsibility. Because corporate social responsibility in many cases has been like, okay, we don't want we want to look good, we are becoming so rich, give them something as well. What he describes goes way beyond that. It is a shared value partnership with the community, with the stakeholders, where they are clear in terms of where are they going, and they enter into that partnership. So it's a very good example, I think, to look at and see. What I can just add is that when it comes to water is the issue that my colleague mentioned, the independency of provision of water services, independent water services producers. Because with water, you need to have a certain level of oversight. Who is setting the performance standards within that collaborative partnerships? Because you don't want the government being part of that partnership and changing the goalposts to suit themselves and not the people. So there has to be still that oversight through of an independent function, either within the municipality or from somewhere, that provide the regulatory function, making sure that the performance standards are met in terms of the quality of water that is supplied, the number of hours water is supplied, and also the revenue collection as well. Because even within that model, you don't want to have reverse incentives where people begin to think you can just get water for free. Because water still has to be paid for in terms of the asset and the cost of service. So I think I would still bring in the issue of performance standards that is needed. One example I can share is India.
Maybe you can hold on for that. I want to Percy to come through. Hold on the example for India. We'll come back. So that we also take questions. You wanted to add something, Percy, on this?
Thank you. I would say different administrations, different approaches. And I know it's a political question, but basically being part of that particular system, I would say that in terms of water and sanitation, our current minister did not start now because it's an election year to really decide that he needs to be there on the ground in terms of doing what's necessary. Ever since this particular administration has come to the fore, he's always been looking at how to get into sorting out the problems. And I did say earlier that part of the problem is actually structural if you consider that the part that is dealing with service delivery, it's not actually reporting even to the particular minister. And and something that one does outside this particular space now as a South African, you also look at all the political promises. And to my colleague's point, none of the other political parties say anything different in terms of service delivery for water. So, and whatever is being done now has actually come through cabinet. So I don't think we're at a point where we'll see empty promises being made and then there's no follow through. I mean, you listen to what the president was saying this morning. It actually captures that. The one thing that we did not capture in terms of the discussions this morning to here, it's we're talking, I'll get to the private-public partnership, but as well, the Infrastructure South Africa has actually been set up to say, this is where the state comes in to actually ensure that these projects can actually go ahead. Some of the projects we are doing, and there's a lot of projects that have actually been mentioned. So you can see the commitment, but it really needs a particular, and I mean, I've gone through a lot of ministers and DGs, and so maybe this is a biased view from my side in terms of what needs to be done and whether somebody's doing it. It really needs a particular kind of constitution to say, I am actually going to do this. But from where I sit, I'm very confident that this is not just electioneering. And the current minister, and I'm hoping he comes back, usually says, let's put politics aside. This is about service delivery to the people, and let's make sure that that happens.
Okay.
The second part, maybe on the public-private partnership. We were also challenged this morning to talk about innovative funding. And I think the example made with Lebalelo is actually a good one when it comes to that. The issue here is it's not, it depends. Is it just between private sector in terms of those that have money and the state? Or is it a tripartite where you now say the state is not representing the people need to represent themselves as well in this thing? If you look at that part of the area, mining houses, of course, need water for their own operations. The big thing always comes posed that to say, ultimately after the allocations have been made, if there's more requirement, because water is a finite resource, if there's more allocations, what do? Do you say there's enough coming out of the system, or if there's not enough, would the mining houses have him put their money down, say, look, you can take part of the portion that's sitting with us or not? So that, I think as the other panelist was saying, the regulation of that part is very important, because sometimes it can be, I need to get my allocation, then from there I don't have to worry about what happens. So it's a very good thing in terms of what you're doing, but the most important thing would be what happens post that, because constitutionally, the state is still responsible for making sure that water is available for everybody. But private money always makes sure that they get what's due to them in terms of the investment that they make. Yeah. So it's a very good direction in terms of what needs to be taken, but that regulation that needs to happen. That's why earlier my answer related to actually having a regulatory body that doesn't just look at tariffs, but actually looking at the performance and all of these things to say, if you have a tariff like this, what does that entail, and how do you ensure that the standards are of the right level?
Okay, no,
Thank
that's
you.
good. We'll see the Balel. So we have two more questions, 2 or 3. Yeah, please go ahead. There's a couple of them, actually.
Hey, can you hear me? Okay. I am Nonjabolo, and I am under the Urban and Public Infrastructure Research Unit at the University of Cape Town. So as a potential PhD candidate, I wanted to ask the WRC what water infrastructure management efficiency projects or innovations do you have to address these evident problems that have been mentioned in this session? Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Hilton. I'm from Holco Water. And unlike the Lebolelo Water Users Association, which is a case of, as was just mentioned, it's mining houses obviously trying to get water to themselves, and then with that, having a spin-off with that. We are in the deliberate business of selling water. So in other words, I'm trying to sell it for profit. And the amount of problems that we pick up in simply just getting a water service provider license from a municipality is staggering. And some of the reasons include, today there's a council, 6 months from now it's a new council, then in a year's time there's a new municipal manager, 6 months later there's another one, there's an acting one, there's an acting one, there's an acting one, and your documents never get signed. So it's simple things like this that then sort of holds up the process. So our model that we've rather focused on for now is we provide water to 250,000 people across 3 provinces currently, but we do it through the assistance of mines. So through the social and labor plans, effectively we spend our own capital for infrastructure. We'll drill a borehole, we'll treat that water, we'll put the piping in, put the reservoir tanks up, necessary pumps, create a whole water reticulation system, and we then charge the mine per kiloliter of water for that community, right? So this is a partnership that we've now built with the mine, and also on the local level with some of those municipalities. I can give you an example. In Mogalakwena municipality, we supply about 1/3 of the population with water. 1/3 does not have access to water, and the other third is supplied by the municipality. The municipality in total has 2 bakkies. My team in Mogalakwena has more than 10 bakkies. So we tend to then support the municipality even in their area of supply, just through our MOU that we've got with them. But we've still not been able to get to a point where we can have a water service provider license to assist with the 1/3 that does not have water, that is not within the mine's reach in terms of their social labor plan, where we would want to sell water, all right? So I'm in the business, obviously, of making sure that that water operation I set up is as efficient as possible. And so what I would have wanted, and I was hoping that the minister was here today, I wanted to ask that pertinent question of what is being done to make the playing field in such a way that private players can participate, because there's been this constant call for the past 4 or 5 years about private players coming to the market. And there are some of us, in particular in the rural space, I think we're probably the biggest player at the moment in rural South Africa, so in terms of rural water provision. So our model works on making sure people get at least 50 liters per person per day. Before, those people didn't have access to water. So how can we help government expand this program so that all of rural South Africa can get decentralized water, right? So we can talk about bulk systems, and bulk systems. Those work for good big urban centers where you've got that access, or you've got big industrial users like mines who will fund that, right? But what happens in those communities and those far-flung areas where they don't have that, okay? So that is where you can typically set up what you call a water mini-grid, in like the same way that you get in Africa, you'll get plenty energy mini-grids. In other words, it's too expensive to build the transmission line. It's too expensive to build the big dam. Why aren't we looking at other solutions and building a framework around that?
Yeah, I think it's a comment. In the absence of the minister, if you can, because I know the DG is somewhere in one of the panels as well. I don't know whether you managed to speak to him. If you have not, you can drop me an email. I can abuse the platform. I work for DBSA. We have established a partnership with Water Affairs. Well, Water and Sanitation, in this case, shows you how old I am. So we can establish and try to link. There's somebody who's running some program. Let's see how it works. But it sounds very brilliant. Okay, so let's take more questions. We have not forgotten the first question that has been asked by a PhD to the Water Research Commission. So, yes, please.
Good afternoon. Sekgomo Tsokelefetse from Lebalelo Water User Association. My question is more in terms of the experience I had within the water space, dealing with the water resources management. I had worked in a few projects that, you know, in the feasibility, they were planned to give a certain capacity. And I think we've seen the project being, let's say, given directives to implementing agencies to implement them at a certain, you know, capacity. And I'll make an example of one of the projects that spoke about 100, you know, million cubic meters per annum. Then later it was changed, you know, capacity kept on changing. But when looking into the financial requirement to do that project at, you know, that difference in changes of volumes, you realize that there's little amount of money, you know, that you need to change from saying, take from 100 and make it at 50. If you need water, you can do another 50. When you do that, you realize that, you know, a lot of money that is supposed to be spent in terms of, you know, doing it once off and wanting to repeat, you know, frustrate the whole process, because the mining sector, it was in the Elisras Elepalale. It was coming with where there were Sasol, coming through Sasol project, and then there were the expansion of the mines, and then secondly, there was what you call the FGDs, you know, for ESCO. So what happens is that in changing strategy of the mining resources, you know, it was said to say, let's make it to be smaller. If we need future, and when the land acquisition was done for it, they said, allow bigger space so that you can put a secondary pipeline. Now, when looking into implementing that project, you realize that the design component of it is a repeat, because, you know, it has been done. So if you do the expansion, you are going to spend again for what you could have spent once off. So the question is, where do we come with getting the mindset, you know, to talk about planning for the project and being able to deliver it in such a way that, you know, a lot of money can be saved and the project can be done once, allowing for, you know, expansion rather of the network of supply instead of having to come and try to do the phase, I don't like phases, phase 1, phase 2, of what could have been done once. And I think that itself now shrinking, the economic stimulation, because other companies or other industries, they start because there's resources. So some companies, they will want to start when water is there. And that's why you will see the pressure for us now to start doing the project and repeating them and going through the process now that needs the government to intervene, where it's water licenses, your water use licenses, your environmental authorization, which takes a lot of time. So where can we have a space where we can talk about having the purposeful long-term planning in the horizon of implementing, rather than going and then trying to go up and down and repeating the project?
I think we've got your question. I think Percy seems to be familiar with that question. It's like either you build a spaghetti pipeline or a bigger capacity instead of you dig the trenches again for smaller. We get you. I saw there was a question here. Yes, Sandile?
Thank you, Zoto. It's not a question, but it's a comment from the water board perspective. I am Sandile Mkhize from Makhalis Water. I think you were right, Zoto, to say there's a stakeholder that is lacking in the panel in terms of SALGA, which is representing the municipality, because you find that when it comes to infrastructure funding or financing, the municipality, which is part of the water value chain, tends to play a critical role in ensuring whether the projects are funded or bankable or not. I speak this because of the experience that one has, where as Makhalis Water, we submitted 9 projects to Infrastructure Fund for funding. Only 2 were approved and we are currently implementing. When you look at the reason for failure of funding of the other 7, 3 key things were there. It's non-revenue water from the beneficiary, which is the Water Service Authority or the municipality, which will be in the range of 40% to 60%, some even higher. 2 is the issue of debt, where you find that the water boards are owed by municipalities in the regions of billions of rands due to lack of or poor credit control measures by the municipalities. Then the third one, I think Alex spoke about it, is the issue of cost-reflective tariff, where they will look at this scheme and say, but the tariff that is being charged here, it will not ensure recovery within the reasonable time of the money that has been invested in this infrastructure. And I think if we can be able to address those 3 key things, we will start to see the rate of investment in water infrastructure projects increasing. But without those, you find that there is private sector willing to blend finance infrastructure projects. But what stops them is these 3 things that are happening. And mostly these are happening at a municipal level or at a beneficiary level. Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you so much. So we can answer the last 2 questions. We have literally 7 minutes to go. So in the next 2 minutes, Water Research Council, if you can answer, and maybe on the spaghetti or bigger capacity ahead of demand, Percy can answer literally, and then we'll wrap up with the closing comments so that we stick to the exact time.
Yeah. I think from the Water Research Commission, there's quite a few projects on the go, because we're also rethinking infrastructure provision or service provision in the face of centralized, decentralized, and distributed infrastructure. So how would you provide that for new settlements or even retrofit into existing settlements? So with some of the sanitation aspects, there is a vision, a long-term vision, that we basically could move to an appliance-type full sanitation unit with your house, with full recycle. And so we take off that 11 liters a day per flush, which sits at majority of our houses. So bringing the water use down, making sure we don't keep topping up with potable water and starting to really shift beneficial use of water for the right kind of sources. So there's a lot of thinking around how would these settlements be planned, designed, what would we need to bring into those spaces. The other aspect is really around spatial design with water-sensitive design. So how should cities of the future be designed and is the way we've been planning and designing fit now that you can have more intense floods, for example, droughts, higher temperatures? How would these cities look? And I think globally we see examples, Singapore, for example, how they created a sponge city around those things. And I think in South Africa, for example, on the east, we're going to get wetter, maybe more flash floods, that kind of stuff. On the west, drier. And then in certain parts, high temperatures would, which are going to come about, as well as sea level rises around the coast. So we know that the infrastructure that was planned like 50 years ago and using those kind of principles will now need to be rethought in terms of doing it. And if we're going to put investment now for the next 25, 30 years, we better start thinking about that as well and not do business as usual. So there's a lot of PhD projects that you could actually contribute to.
Okay, thank you. Percy, just last shot.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick, but I think part of what Valerie has said is part of the solution to this. The problem is all the time, the sector is looking at a balancing act. I agree with you. Having to dig trenches or put up a dam only to find that your future capacity, that is going to grow, but yet we're not doing that at this particular point in time. It also depends on who's funding the project. Because if you go into the market to borrow that money, the chances are it's going to shoot up the tariff, especially if you're saying, I'm doing this now, but this capacity I really need 10 years down the line. It means you need to pay for that amount now. But more importantly, it's about your source. Gone are the days when South Africa had single-purpose dams where you'd say, this dam is being built only for this particular service. Now, we were talking about, I think the gentleman next to you was talking about people picking up stones and making their case clear. You don't have that opportunity where you'd have this infrastructure and you have a pipeline and the communities around it are not actually catered for. Now, Valerie has just talked about the East and the West, or the West in terms of being drier as you look into the future, as far as that is concerned. Now, when you build this infrastructure, the capacity of that infrastructure needs to serve multiple purposes and maybe different communities. So sometimes you'd find that you are restricted by the yield, the potential yield of that particular system that is being utilized, even if your requirements are going to be bigger in the future. South Africa is not blessed with a lot of sources of water. Perhaps the whole thing of desalination needs to be revisited because we have over 3,000 kilometers of coastline, and maybe it's about time that we start looking at how to utilize that for the sake of the better part of the country. Because we're lucky in that way, but we haven't started using it. So the key here is the potential yield and how many people needs to be served by that. Now, the department starts looking at it and saying, we'll do this as phase one, then maybe we'll do phase two. I'm not saying it's the right way to do it, but I'm just highlighting some of the challenges that have to be dealt with at that particular point in time.
Okay.
Thanks.
You can go to TCT, they're very creative with the funding model where you can have dummy offtake while it's waiting for the other offtake. So in closing, literally half a minute per person. Let me start with you, Dr. Lester Coleman. Just so in closing, half a minute, literally.
Yeah, thank you. I think to plan, implement, and maintain infrastructure and assets, you need the right professionals. I think my obligation is to say as a professional body, we need to focus on getting the right people. We need to focus on training them, and we need to focus on retaining them.
Thank you. Dr. Naidu?
Yeah, I think for me, the take-home message here is one size does not fit all, and we shouldn't only put our effort on the big and the bulk. It's important, but we also, the same way we have the expertise with TCTA and the RAN waters of the world, we need to build the expertise around how would we manage with the municipalities these independent water providers, or maybe shared service model in these sort of local municipalities going forward. And if we're able to design that effectively, I think there's a lot of not only shared value kind of partnerships in segments in the country, but I think there will also be better stewardship of water, protection of the resources, and we'll start to see reduction in some of the public health issues that we are seeing across the country, and hopefully we're able to provide more water for productive use for the country.
Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, to the potential PhD student, artificial intelligence, use of artificial intelligence in water services delivery is a key promising industry. Leak detection, water treatment, Korea, Singapore, they are really going very fast ahead of us. I think it can help some of the challenges the municipalities are solving and are facing. And then my colleague, I'm going to see the DG from here, he's next door, DG for water, Sean Phillips. I invite you, we go together. Yeah. Because the issues you are talking about licensing are the issues we've been discussing with them for the last 18 months, and they are dealing with these issues. So I think you can have that conversation. My final message, separate service delivery from regulation and licensing. You go a long way to solve that problem. Professionalize the delivery of water services. And please, there's an act there calling for stakeholder participation for review by the minister. Look at it very carefully. I know from experience this is very progressive, and some of these challenges that you are having would also be addressed through that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Dexter?
Yeah, just from my side for the green hydrogen aspect, South Africa, can be the world leaders with our best solar resources for green hydrogen and potentially leaders for desalination plants in the future. So, we need to have upscale for partnerships with universities, transfer of skills to facilitate this.
Thank you. Any parting shot from your side? You've said a mouthful. You are most welcome.
To stop complaining on my side, I would say I'm very encouraged looking at where the state sits in terms of saying it's about time that they come to augment the infrastructure, especially for water and sanitation delivery. Before, we've talked a lot about it, but there was no platform where you could actually look at the state coming in and saying, if this project is shovel-ready in every way, then we are prepared to put money there to actually ensure that you still have accessible and affordable water. And I think South Africa is on the right track as far as that is concerned. But we've talked about a whole lot of other issues that needs to be dealt with.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, on that note, thank you very much to the speakers for your time that you have taken out of your busy schedule preparing for this session. And thank you very much for the audience for engaging. It was quite lively. I know it's afternoon and then 1.5 hours. Thank you so much.